2024 UFC, another great year of the sport. Crazy events like UFC 300, UFC 299, fighters like Alex Pereira and Ilia Topuria carrying the UFC on their backs this year. Insane fights and performances all throughout the entire MMA landscape. Like 2024 was a solid year, man. And I wonder how many fans were actually introduced to the sport this year compared to the others. We had a bunch of new champions, a lot of new contenders, big upsets in the sport, 7 new champions across all the divisions, with Merab Dvalishvili beating Sean O'Malley, Ilia Topuria beating Alexander Volkanovski, Bilal Muhammad beating Leon Edwards, Dricus Du Plessis beating Sean Strickland, Valentina Shevchenko becoming once again a champion of the flyweight division, and Juliana Pena once again becoming the champion of the bantamweight division. With all these new champions, it goes to show how great guys like Alexander Pantoja and Islam Makhachev, Tom Aspinall, and Zhang Weili were to keep their belts this year. But before we get to the awards, this video is sponsored by Plarium, and special thanks to Universal Studios Licensing. Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of today's video, is partnering with Universal Products and Experiences and Mattel to bring He-Man and Skeletor to the game as legendary champions. An amazing game to play in between fights or just whenever you have free time. And man, there's been so many heroes in the game that we haven't gotten yet, and Raid does have an offer for you to get one of the most powerful heroes in all of Raid Shadow Legends. And 2 of these powerful heroes you can get are the legendary He-Man and Skeletor. Starting from November 25th to December 25th, you can get both of these legendary champions. He-Man's all about enhancing his own attack, defeating the enemy, whereas Skeletor is all about debuffing his enemy. And everyone can get Skeletor specifically for free simply by logging into Raid on 7 days between November 25th and January 8th. And on that last day, on day 7, you'll get Skeletor and extra bonus rewards for the next 7 days after that. Players can also complete the Champion Pass to get the Champion He-Man. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, you definitely have to at least try it out. Click my link in the description or scan my QR code to get great bonuses. And on sign up, you'll immediately get a huge starter pack with an epic champion, Tagoar from the Orc faction. Then from level 15, you'll get another starter pack with an epic champion, Uugo. And also on top of that, when you get Raid through my link, use a promo code Monkey King. It's one word, and you'll get the legendary champion, Sun Wukong, for free. Just use the promo code, available until January 7th, and this all gives you an opportunity at 5 different powerful heroes in Raid Shadow Legends. Just check your inbox after and they'll be there. And once you're in, make sure to join my clan so we could dominate this together. Thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and special thanks to Universal Studios Licensing. But let's go through the Weasels MMA Awards for 2024. We have a whole bunch of different categories, and we'll start with the basic one. Who was the fighter of the year? This is something we talked about before. I think the 5 fighters that are up for debate for this award are Alex Pereira, who had 3 title wins in record-breaking time, back to back to back. The only champion with 3 wins this year at UFC 300 in April, UFC 303 in June, and UFC 307 in October. All knockout wins, and even saving cards where the UFC had to scramble for some kind of title fight. Alex was the one that stepped up as a champion. The other fighter could be Ilia Topuria. Even though he only had 2 wins, the least of any of the fighters in debate here, he does have arguably the 2 biggest wins of the year, beating Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 298 in February, and then he beat Max Holloway at UFC 308 in October. Both knockout wins, the only fighter to ever knock out Max in a fight. He's the other fighter that could win. Then there's Joaquin Buckley. Joaquin Buckley had a fantastic career, 4 wins. Went from unranked to number 6 in the welterweight division, a fighter that nobody thought would be some top contender in the welterweight division. It's crazy to see him amongst the best at welterweight when Kevin Holland isn't, right? Kevin Holland knocked him out in the middleweight division. Chris Curtis knocked him out. Alessio Di Chirico knocked him out, but it looks like moving down a weight class was such a big move for his career. In 2024, Buckley beat Vicente Luque by TKO, which put him into the top 15, then beat Nursultan Ruzaboyev, then knocked out Wonderboy, then TKO'd Colby Covington due to a cut. Big year for Buckley. The other fighter is Carlos Prates, who also had 4 wins this year. Not only was he unranked, he wasn't even in the UFC in the beginning of this year. He had his UFC debut in February against Trevin Giles, knocked him out. Then he knocked out Charles Radke, then knocked out Li Jingliang, and then Neil Magny. Now he's a top 15 fighter. Big year for the fighting nerd. I think the winner of Fighter of the Year, after a lot of debate between 2 specific fighters, I think it's really between Alex and Ilia. Fighter of the Year is Ilia Topuria. Ilia beat 2 all-time great fighters back to back. Insane finishes. First fighter ever to knock out Max Holloway. And of course, his wins are so much bigger than Alex's, where Alex didn't beat a single all-time great fighter. Ilia beat 2 of them. And you don't have to be an all-time great fighter to have a great year. When Ilia is doing that in the same year, it's going to be very hard to beat him, right? That's the equivalent of like if Alex knocked out Daniel Cormier and prime Alexander Gustafsson in the same year or something like that. But instead, he beat Yuri, Jamal Hill, and Khalil Roundtree. None of them compare to Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. But we do have a separate category, which is going to go to the most impactful fighter of the year. Who was carrying the year on their back? Essentially, if it wasn't for them, the year would have been different for the sport. And the nominees are Alexander Pantoja, who had 2 title defenses this year, essentially got raised from the co-main event to the main event of UFC 310, welcomed a newcomer, and earlier beat Brandon Royval for the second time. There's also Ilia Topuria, who beat Volkanovski and Max. Big wins this year. Then there's Joaquin Buckley, who fought 4 times this year and also headlined a card as well. And finally, Alex Pereira, where he saved UFC 303, amazing performances, headlined UFC 300, which might be one of the biggest UFC cards ever. And Alex Pereira is, of course, the winner of Impactful Fighter of the Year. If it wasn't for him, 2024 for MMA would have been very different. Then we go to the most improved fighter. Which fighter made the biggest improvements to their game? We're talking about skills and techniques and all that stuff. Nobody thought that this guy would be as good as he actually became. I guess the nominees or the fighters in debate here are Charles Johnson. Made huge improvements not only to his game planning for fights, his boxing got way better, his footwork got better, and he really put that on display when he defeated Joshua Van, showing everybody that Charles Johnson is in fact a completely different fighter now. There is Joaquin Buckley. Again, like I mentioned before, nobody thought that Buckley would ever be one of the best welterweights. He was extremely wild before. He was reckless with his striking, didn't wrestle as much, but then he started to use his takedowns and actually strike more intelligently, be more patient with his power, and pace himself better throughout his fights. Joaquin Buckley's fight IQ has grown more than anything else, but he has also become a well-rounded fighter. Then Youssef Zalal is another one of the best improved fighters in 2024. He was cut from the UFC in 2022 after a 3-fight loss streak. He lost to Ilia Topuria, which is crazy he fought him that early, Sung Woo Choi, and Sean Woodson. Then he had a draw with Damon Blackshear when he tried his hand in the bantamweight division. He got cut from the UFC, went to Sparta Combat League, back at featherweight, destroyed 3 fighters there, came back to the UFC, and has looked like a completely new fighter. 3 submission wins in the UFC against Billy Quarantillo, Jarno Aarons, and Jack Shore, winning 2 Performance of the Night bonuses. So he went from exclusively decisions in his first UFC run. Every single one of his fights went to a decision. His second UFC run have all been finishes. Then there's Alexander Volkov, who improved his takedown defense, even improved his striking to where it was, now be able to outstrike Ciryl Gane, where they had a fight before. There's a 1-to-1 comparison with how much better Alexander Volkov has gotten. He fought Ciryl Gane a couple years ago, and he got completely outstruck. In 2024, he outstruck Ciryl Gane. He outstruck Sergey Pavlovich, to the point that now nobody thinks Pavlovich is like the same kind of fighter. He doesn't have the same aura around him because of what Volkov was able to do to him, picking him apart on the stand-up. That doesn't mean Sergey's that bad. It just shows how much better Volkov has gotten. And I think the Ciryl Gane performance, which he should have won, showed that no, Sergey's not bad. Volkov is just way better than we thought he was. But I think the most improved fighter from 2024 is Joaquin Buckley. Nobody else surprised the fans of how much better they have gotten than Buckley. From what could have been essentially some journeyman, right? Eventually he'll win some, lose some, win some, lose some, until he is that journeyman of the sport, to actually one of the top contenders of the welterweight division. Nobody thought Buckley would be that good. The prospect of the year. This is the prospect with the best performances, the best wins, and all of that. The nominees are John Silva, who had 3 wins this year, knocking out Weston Wilson, Charles Jourdain, the first fighter ever to knock him out, and he went up another weight class to fight Drew Dober and TKO'd him due to a doctor stoppage. Amazing performance from John Silva in that fight. Then there's Peyton Talbot, who knocked out Cameron Simon, another talented fighter, and Giannis Gamouri in 19 seconds, showing that he is going to be a future contender of the bantamweight division. Then there's Felipe Lima, submitting Muhammad Naimov, which was a very difficult opponent for your debut, and put on an excellent performance against Miles Johns, showing that he is also going to be a future contender of the featherweight division. Then there's Carlos Prates. Technically, he's not a prospect anymore because he is ranked, but he started this year outside of the UFC, went from his debut to top 15 in 1 year, knocking out Trevin Giles, Charles Radke, Li Jing Liang, and Neil Magny. And I think the winner is Carlos Prates. I don't think you can go to anyone else. John Silva's close. I think he's like second, but Carlos Prates literally went from non-UFC fighter to top 15, 4 wins in a single year. If that's not prospect of the year, I don't know what else is. And he knocked out all of those fighters too. The fastest rise of the year. This is the fighter that went from nobody to somebody. The nominees are Diego Lopez, who was unranked in the beginning of the year and now is number 3 in the rankings. He is essentially at a title shot. That is absolutely insane. He knocked out Sadiq Youssef, beat Dan Ige and Brian Ortega, and now he's right there for a title shot. There's Carlos Prates, like we mentioned before, non-UFC fighter to now number 13 in the rankings. Insane. Umar Nurmagomedov, he went from number 13 to number 3 in the bantamweight division off of 1 win though. So he didn't have the amount of wins of Diego Lopez, but he did rise 10 spots up in the rankings. And finally, Jack Della Maddalena, who went from number 11 to number 4 with 1 win against Gilbert Burns. So I think it's a debate between 2 fighters. It's either Diego Lopez or Carlos Prates. And I'm going to go Diego Lopez. I think it's a much harder climb to do in 1 year, going from unranked to number 3 and not doing it in just 1 win. Multiple wins to get there. Multiple chances for a victory or defeat. And he won every single one of those fights. Short notice fights and stuff like that too go into it. I think Diego Lopez had the biggest rise in 2024. And then we go to the performances. Then the best win of the year. This is the highest level win of 2024. Which was the biggest opponent that a fighter has beaten? And the nominees are Ilia Topuria defeating Alexander Volkanovski, Ilia Topuria defeating Max Holloway, Dricus Du Plessis defeating Israel Adesanya, and Bilal Muhammad defeating Leon Edwards. I think the biggest win this year was Ilia Topuria defeating Max Holloway. I would have said Volkanovski, but it's a Volkanovski that was coming off the knockout against Islam. That's why I wouldn't have him as number 1. I think the Max Holloway win was bigger for Ilia because that was a prime Max Holloway coming off the best performance of his career against Justin Gaethje, and Ilia was the first fighter to ever knock out Max. So not only was the win big, but how he did it was massive as well. Dricus beating Adesanya was a big one too, even though he submitted him, which everyone thought he could, right? Obviously, Dricus can submit Adesanya. To hurt him in the stand-up and then take him down was something a lot of people didn't expect, right? That's why Dricus win against Adesanya is so big, and the level of opponent. Adesanya is one of the greatest middleweights of all time. Then you look at O'Malley knocking out Sterling. It's against one of the greatest bantamweights ever, but that was the way he was gonna win that fight, right? And then Bilal versus Leon, beat arguably top 5 greatest welterweights ever. Knockout of the year. Who had the best knockout? This is talking about the technique used and how unexpected the knockout was or how crazy it was in general. All of it goes together. The nominees would be Max Holloway knocking out Justin Gaethje at UFC 300, exchanging him at the end of the fight, 1 second left, gets the knockout, slumps Justin Gaethje to the canvas with an overhand in one of the most iconic scenes in UFC history. There's Vinicius Oliveira knocking out Bernardo Sopai. It was such a crazy knockout where both fighters were competitive. It looked like Bernardo was the better fighter going into the 3rd round. Then he gassed out, and Vinicius Oliveira landed a flying knee that KO'd Sopai with no follow-up shots needed. 1-shot knockout walk-off for Vinicius Oliveira. And the big thing that went into the fight was that Bernardo Sopai was regarded as a very good prospect going into that fight. He was also the favorite as well. Then there's Alex Pereira knocking out Jamal Hill, right? He was supposed to win the fight. He was the favorite going into it, even though a lot of like the UFC commentators and stuff like that thought that Jamal Hill was going to win the fight somehow. There was a lot of feeling out moments in the fight, and then Jamal Hill lands a low blow. Referee Herb Dean steps in movie-like fashion. Alex Pereira was the one that continues his own fight. He didn't need the referee, told him hold off, walks down Jamal Hill, slips his punch, and KOs him with the signature left hook. Then there's Shira Bullet knocking out Armin Petrosyan with a double spinning back fist. Video game-like combination. Never seen someone get a knockout like that. He spins for one back fist, gets blocked, then spins the other way to create even more momentum, lands that back fist on the chin, KOs Petrosyan. The technique in that fight was insane, but I think the knockout of the year, of course, goes to Max Holloway KOing Justin Gaethje. It wasn't just a knockout of the year. That's one of the greatest knockouts in UFC history. That's going to be on every single highlight reel. That's the kind of knockout that would introduce new fans to the sport. You want to see how great this sport is? Show them Max Holloway knocking out Justin Gaethje. I don't know if there's another moment that could hook on new fans to the sport than that. Then we'll go to submission of the year. What was the most creative or spectacular submission win? And the higher level the opponent, the more it's going to weigh. There's Gerald Meerschaert submitting Edmund Shabazian with an arm triangle choke. This is a big comeback win as well. Edmund Shabazian was winning the fight. He was stuffing all the takedowns. It looked like Gerald Meerschaert was completely outclassed. He gets hurt to the body, goes in for a takedown, gets stuffed. Shabazian trying to finish him. Then when they get back up to their feet, GM3 times a knee, takes him down, arm triangles him. Huge win for Gerald Meerschaert, man. Then there's Dricus Du Plessis submitting Israel Adesanya in Dricus kind of fashion. He rocks him in the stand-up, drags him to the ground, submits him with a rear naked choke. Big win for Dricus Du Plessis. Then Khamzat Chimaev submitting Whitaker in a fantastic performance. Taking him down, face cranking him, Whitaker's teeth gets pushed in. First fighter to ever submit Whitaker. And then Islam Makhachev submitting Dustin Poirier. Hits him with a single leg sweep, guillotine into a Darce choke. Multiple techniques used to get that submission in what I think was the highest level submission this year. There was not a single submission more high level, more technical than how Islam submitted Dustin Poirier. So that is the submission of the year, and it was one of the most skilled fights this year as well against a dangerous opponent. So I think Islam submitting Dustin is the submission of the year. Fight of the year, which was the best single fight of 2024. There was Mitzbek Earlby versus Matusz Rebecki. A lot of people thought Earlby was going to win this fight, but it came down to the scorecards and a split decision win for Rebecki. Both guys exchanging shots, taking each other down, minutes of control time on the ground. Rebecki got a knockdown, damaged Earlby's eye. Earlby inflicting damage on Rebecki. Just an absolute war. One of the best fights of the year. Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Very high level fight. Excellent boxing between them. Good wrestling. Dustin showing better wrestling than he's ever shown in his entire career. Both fighters landing huge shots in the stand-up, showing Islam Makhachev's improved striking, and then he finishes the fight with one of the best submissions I've ever seen. Islam's entire grappling sequence there was my favorite grappling sequence in UFC history for me. Then Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovics. This fight had everything when it came to striking. The fight was so insane. High-level striking for both fighters, and action-packed the entire fight. Round 3 was insane. The jab of Zellhuber versus the combinations of Ribovics. Zellhuber implementing his kicks. Then eventually the fight closed in into a technical brawl where they were both exchanging with each other in the pocket in moments, disengaging where Zellhuber with high kicks, Ribovics trying to blitz in with his combinations. Just an insane fight from beginning to end. Then Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree. Great fight, excellent striking. Alex hit the flow state in the 4th round, showing how technical he can be with both his offense and defense. And for the first 2 rounds, Khalil Rountree landing big left hands, dropped Alex Pereira in the 2nd round with a hook, and Khalil showing his toughness in the 3rd and 4th rounds. So 2024 had some insane fights, but I think the winner of fight of the year is Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovics. This is one of the greatest fights I've ever seen. This fight had everything when it came to striking. Technique, skill, heart, grit, and both fighters trying to get the knockout. Just a technical war between Zellhuber and Ribovics. Their performance of the year, the single best performance, the most flawless a fighter looked this year, and the nominees are Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. Max looked great in that fight, landing the spinning back kicks, winning most of the boxing exchanges, and then finally got that big knockout at the end of the fight. Manel Kape versus Bruno Silva. Amazing boxing from Kape, and probably the best performance of his entire career. He hit the flow state, landing big shots from distance, taunting Silva, landing big combinations in close after engaging with the long left hand or a lunging right hook, putting on a show for the fans. Another amazing performance this year was Brandon Moreno defeating Amir Albazi. Coming back from the lackluster performance against Brandon Royval, he looked better than ever against Albazi. And finally, Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whittaker, where Khamzat took him down right in the beginning of the fight, controlling for the most part, even though Robert Whittaker was resisting some positions and got out in one moment that got taken to the ground again and submitted for the first time in his career. I think the winner of performance of the year is Khamzat Chimaev defeating Robert Whittaker. This is the fight that showed everybody, okay, Khamzat's probably going to destroy everybody at middleweight. Like, if he could do that to Robert Whittaker, this is like the big defining thing. He did that against Robert Whittaker, one of the best anti-wrestlers middleweight has ever seen. A fighter who was preparing for Khamzat for 2 training camps, knew exactly what Khamzat was going to do, and he still couldn't stop it. And he is the first fighter to submit Robert Whittaker without landing that many strikes. Whittaker officially landed 2 strikes in the fight, and I can't even remember what those strikes were. They must have been some like tapping punches against the fence, and beat Whittaker in the 1st round. I thought the second one was maybe Manel Kape versus Bruno Silva, but the reason why I can't have that over Khamzat's is because it was against Bruno Silva, right? If he was doing that against Brandon Moreno or Kai Kara France, then it's a completely different thing, right? It's a way higher skilled opponent. Khamzat beat Whittaker that way. It wasn't like he did it against Jack Hermanson or something. Comeback of the year. The biggest comeback from losing to winning in a single fight. Gerald Mearshart defeats Edmund Shabazian. Again, looked like he was getting outclassed. He gets hurt to the body, takes him to the ground, and then submits him. Alex Pereira defeating Khalil Rountree. He lost the first 2 rounds, he got dropped in the 2nd round, came back in the 3rd and 4th, and completely dominated Khalil. Neil Magny versus Mike Malott. Mike Malott absolutely dominated Neil Magny. Gas is out, Magny takes him to the ground and TKOs him. Renato Moicano versus Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner drops him, destroying him. The strikes that Jalen was throwing at Renato's head, he was trying to knock this guy out with everything, and he nearly did. But Moicano realized that he needed money, and he turned the fight around, took Jalen Turner to the ground, and TKOs him. But I think the best comeback fight is Renato Moicano defeating Jalen Turner. I think the Mearshart and Shabazian fight was close, but Moicano literally looked like he was about to lose the fight, and then comes back and finishes Jalen Turner in the next round. The team of the year, the best fighting team. So you have Fighting Nerds, you have the American Top Team, you have American Kickboxing Academy, Kill Cliff FC. I think the winner is Fighting Nerds. They stormed 2024. In the UFC, I believe they were like 11-1 or 11-2. It depends if you count Thiago Moises, who also trains at American Top Team. I think he's back at American Top Team. But out of like the original exclusive fighting nerds, Bruno Brasil's the only one that lost in the UFC. Obviously, they have a lot more fighters in other organizations. Yeah, Bruno Brasil was a 1-1 this year, whereas Caio Borralho, John Silva, Carlos Prates, and Mauricio Ruffi were all undefeated. Then the fight card of the year. From top to bottom, what was the best card of the year? With exciting fights, performances, a card that really delivered. And I think the nominees are UFC 308, which was Ilia Topuria fighting Max Holloway. So there was that big knockout. Khamzat submitting Robert Whittaker. Magomed Ankalaev defeating Alexander Rakic. Laurent Murphy defeating Dan Ige. Shira Bullet with the big knockout against Armin Petrosyan, double spinning back fist. Ibo Aslan annihilating a stationary, essentially a punching bag in Rafael Sequeira. Jeff Neal with the TKO against Rafael Dos Anjos. Looks like he's back in good form. The crazy fight between Matusz Rebecki and Mitsabek Erlebay. Abos Magomedov gained the submission win against Bruno Ferreira. Kenan Nishchuku in the heavyweight division defeats Chris Barnett. Farid Basharad's great performance against Victor Hugo. Then you had Ismail Nardiev defeating Bruno Silva. Rinat Fakhretdinov defeating Carlos Leal. Great card. Then there's UFC 299 with Sean O'Malley's great performance against Marlon Vera. Dustin Poirier KOing Benoit Saint Denis. Michael Page defeating Kevin Holland. UFC debut. Jack Della Maddalena defeating Gilbert Burns with a big comeback. Peter Yan getting back on the winning column against Song Yadong. Curtis Blaze TKOing Jailton Almeida. Macy Barber defeating Caitlin Seminara. Matusz Gamera defeating RDA. Kyler Phillips beat Pedro Munoz. Felipe Lins defeating Ian Cutelaba. Michelle Pereira destroyed Mikhail Alexiouchuk in about a minute of the first round. Rebellas Despain TKOing Josh Parisian. Asu Almabayev defeating CJ Vergara. And Joanne Wood defeating Marina Moroz. Great card. Then UFC 300. Alex Pereira knocking out Jamal Hill. Zhang Weili defeating Yang Jianan in a much closer fight than people thought it was going to be. Max Holloway with one of the biggest moments of all time against Justin Gaethje. Armin Tsarukyan wins a split decision against Charles Oliveira, which should have been 5 rounds. Bo Nickel with not a great performance against Cody Brundage, but gets a submission win. Yuri Prohaska TKOing Alexander Rakic, which could also be somewhat of a comeback win. Aljamain Sterling, first fight at featherweight defeating Kelvin Kattar. Kayla Harrison destroying Holly Holm in her UFC debut. Diego Lopez destroying Sadiq Youssef. Renato Moicano with the comeback of the year against Jalen Turner. Jessica Andrade defeats Marina Rodriguez. Bobby Green defeats Jim Miller. And Davison Figueiredo submits Cody Garbrandt as the first fight on the whole card. And finally, the Tampa card, where Joaquin Buckley defeated Colby Covington by Dr. Stoppage in the 3rd round. Great performance by Buckley. Cub Swanson knocking out Billy Cortillo. Manel Kape with one of the best performances of the year against Bruno Silva. Dustin Jacoby KOing Vitor Petrino in the 3rd round. Daniel Marcos defeats Adrian Yanez with an amazing fight. Should have been a draw though. Navajo Sterling defeats Tuco Tokos. Michael Johnson KOing Amina Zaitar in the 2nd round. Yoel Alvarez destroying Drakkar Klose in the 1st round. Sean Woodson knocking out Fernando Padilla in the 1st round. Felipe Lima with an excellent performance against Miles Johns. Miranda Maverick defeating Jamie Lynn Horth. Davey Grant with a performance against Ramon Tavares. And Piera Rodriguez with the upset against Josephine Knudsen. Amazing card, man. But the card of the year has to be UFC 300. It was one of the greatest cards of all time. I think UFC 300 was the best card to watch this year. But there were a lot of good cards. And the referee of the year is Jason Herzgoat, the best referee in MMA. So those are my MMA awards of 2024. I know a lot of people might think, where's Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje as fight of the year? That fight was not fight of the year. So firstly, the fight wasn't even close. It was a dominant performance from Max Holloway. To be fight of the year, it has to be competitive. The only thing that Justin Gaethje had was that he dropped Max Holloway at one point of the fight, which is the first knockdown in Max's career. But that was it. For the rest of the fight, Justin Gaethje got torched. He got destroyed out there. There's no way that's fight of the year. And I think I saw on ESPN that one of their journalists, whatever, says that Dricus Du Plessis submitting Israel Adesanya is submission of the year because nobody thought that Dricus could submit Adesanya. If Dricus was going to win that fight, it was most likely by submission. Adesanya, kickboxer, good takedown defense against the fence, not good on the ground, versus one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the middleweight division. I wonder how that's going to go on the ground. But what made that performance so great for Dricus wasn't the submission itself. That was a given. If the fight went to the ground, Adesanya is going to get finished. It was that he hurt him in the stand-up first, then dragged the fight to the ground, then submitted him. It was him doing so well in the stand-up with Adesanya, not on the ground. On the ground was a given. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you guys did, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.